Hey guys, Tom here from the Investing with Tom YouTube channel. Welcome back to the channel. First thing I want to say is thank you to all the new subscribers that have come along. If you're not subscribed, hit subscribe below. The goal is to try and hit 100 subscribers by the end of March. So if you could help me out with reaching that target, I would be very appreciative. So I guess let's explain what's happening in the title first. 10 plus 10 does not equal 20. Essentially, this is a video about compounding interest. It's what Warren Buffett terms the eighth wonder of the world, and I think Albert Einstein might have actually been one of the ones that's kind of supposedly first said that. And it's to do with the way in which small increases in your rate of return can have actually quite dramatic effects on the amount of money you can end up with at the end of an investment career. So one of the things that I hear sometimes out in the investing world is, the market returned 10% this year, Warren Buffett did 20%, so he must be doing twice as good, and that's amazing. And sure, that holds true in a 1 year period. If you invest $1,000 and make a 10% return, you have $1,100 at the end. And if you make a 20% return, you have $1,200 at the end. So you've earned 100 versus 200. You've done twice as well over a 1 year period, and that makes sense. When it doesn't make sense is over multiple years. So the really powerful thing about compound interest is that over time, if you can make a slightly higher rate of return versus a kind of base rate, you'll actually get dramatically better results over the long term. So just to run you through some kind of numbers with that, I've linked some examples in the description as well, and I'd encourage you to go and actually Google compound interest calculator and kind of have a play around with how different rates of return affect the end number. But essentially down below, I've given you an example of what it looks like when you invest $1 for 40 years and earn a 10% return versus what the best investors in the world are able to achieve, which is 20% plus. So I've compared it against a dollar invested at a 20% return per year. And what you'll actually see is that over a 20-year period, rather than the person who's making 20% versus 10% doing twice as well, they're actually doing over 6 times better. So really, really powerful results. So if you invest $1 at 10% for a period of 20 years, you end up with a little under $7 at the end of that 2-decade period. And if you invest and make a 20% return, if you're able to kind of have world-class investment performance, you actually end up with a $38 kind of nest egg per initial dollar that was invested at the start of that period. So over 6 times better, and the more time that you kind of extend this calculation out to, the more extreme the results get. So if you extend that out to a 40-year period, you end up with actually 35 times more money in the 20% return scenario. So compounding interest can have extremely powerful benefits and impacts over the long term. So be a little bit skeptical when you hear people say that they've outperformed the market by 1 or 2%, and you hear people talking about that as if it's not a big number, because an extra 1% a year or an extra 2 or 3% a year over the market can produce phenomenal results. So it's one of those things that's really hard to compute in your head. Compound interest, for whatever reason, the human brain really struggles with those calculations. But I'd encourage you to have a go with the compound interest calculator and kind of get a feel for what those numbers look like. And in terms of practical kind of takeaways from this video, it's a cool little maths trick, I guess, to run some of these numbers and see the differences. But in terms of the practical takeaways that you can get from this video, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. So the first one is, if you're not an active investor, if you're someone that invests in index funds or mutual funds, there's a couple of things that you'll want to look at to make sure you're eking out that extra 1 or 2% where possible. So the big one with mutual funds especially, but also index funds, is around fees. So typically a managed, kind of actively managed mutual fund, which I'm not a huge fan of for this exact reason, they may charge anywhere from 1 to 2% per year in management fees, and the fees that they take off from any returns that are generated. So what that does is if the market returns you say 8% a year on average over a 40-year investing time horizon, that's actually going to knock you down to a 6% return per year. Which again doesn't sound like a huge amount, but when you run that through some compounding interest calculators and actually see some of those numbers, you'll realize that that actually turns out to you ending up with about 50% of the money that you could have had you made that entire 8% return. So if you're investing in index funds, I definitely watch out for fees. I know Vanguard offers some really, really low fees, sort of 0.1% a year and things like that. So that's one of the things I first look at if you want to do index fund investing. So that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is that if you can put some time into learning a little bit about investing, you don't have to go out and generate, you don't have to do double the market average rate of return to see some really dramatic improvements in the amount of money you end up with. Like I said, over a 20-year period, 20% is actually 6 times as good as 10%. So, if the market does 8 and you can do even 9 or 10 by putting in some effort, researching and taking kind of a value investing approach, buying with a margin of safety, all those kinds of things, which I talk about in my other videos, that's going to have a huge impact. Again, I urge you to run some numbers on this and just get a feel for how big just a 1 or 2% improvement in your returns can be. And that's the reason why I'm an active investor and I try to generate some higher returns where possible. So hope you enjoyed the video. I have a pretty hectic next month coming up with travel and that sort of thing, so you may see a few more hotel room videos yet before we get back to the whiteboard, but hope you enjoyed it nonetheless, and I'd love to see some comments down below, hit like, and give me a subscribe. Let's see if we can reach that 100 subscriber in March goal. So that's all from me. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.